Okay, today we are going to talk about critical genre analysis in the context of professional practice. How do we actually analyze not simply the documents, professional documents, not simply the discourses or genres from the professions, but also how to look at professional practice, the kinds of things they normally do, the professional actions. So that is something which is a step further, I wouldn't say step away, but step further in the context of genre analysis, or conventional genre analysis. Now, if I can give you a little bit of puzzling questions, which I actually thought about when I started working on genre theory in the 80s. These were some of the questions which occurred to me. And I thought I must actually find answers to these questions. So in the context of professional discourses and professional genres. Now, first one was, why do professionals write the way they do? Because what I discovered was most of the professionals in a particular field, in a particular discipline, they were writing more or less the same way. And I'm very careful when I use the word more or less. It is not some kind of a template that you copy, but it's not some kind of template. It is a way of doing it, and they have in their mind a certain ways of writing, and they share it amongst all the members of the community, the professional community. So that was the first question that attracted my attention, and I started looking for answers to that question. Then there was additional questions. The second one to my mind was, to what extent their writing is typical of their profession, which is related to the first one. Is it a typical kind of writing, which helps you to identify a genre? Is the genre written typically by a group of people, by members of the professional community in a typical manner, more or less the same? They share the conventions, they share what, their purposes and everything. Third question that I had was, what do they try to achieve through writing? When they write, what is it that they want to accomplish? Legitimate questions for all of them. And of course, the most important one, which came later, was, how do they manipulate, exploit linguistic resources, which means lexicogrammar, semiotic resources, rhetorical, moves or rhetorical structures, or other semiotic resources, or even the conventions to achieve their objectives. So that is a very crucial one. And we'll have more explanation on this. And the next question that came to me was, what makes it possible? Who contributes what, how, when? Are these professional genres always written by one person sitting in his office or in his room or wherever at his desk? Or is it the result of several kinds of interactions, several kinds of voices which are put together and they turn it into some kind of a document, some kind of an action, a discursive action? So these were the questions at the back of my mind when I started with genre analysis in the 80s and 90s. And mind you, I have no hesitation in saying I haven't been able to find very satisfactory answers even today. It is a search which is ongoing. Of course, we are getting a lot more information. We continue to get more information. We continue to add and develop genre analysis further and further in the light of what we discover from our analyses of different kinds of practices, different kinds of texts from different disciplines. So that is the background. And finally, there was another factor which normally people don't consider. And that was, how are their contributions received by their intended audiences? The professionals write, and they write it for a particular kind of audience. They're always audiences, when you write. And how do they the audiences interpret it? How do they take it? Now, we're trying to find some answers to these questions today. And the example I will give you, it will be a complete, illustration of many of these things that I have listed here. Okay, so I'll do the analysis and I'll do that. But before that, let us give a little bit of background on genre theory and critical genre theory for those people who are totally unfamiliar with it. Now, genre analysis in general is an investigation of situated linguistic behavior. It's linguistic behavior. It may be spoken, it may be written, it may be visual, it may be one person talking, it may be several people talking, it may be something which is written collaboratively by different people, but it is all situated in a particular context. Whenever we have this kind of linguistic behavior, it is in a particular context, in a particular situation, with a particular objective. So it's always situated. And people have actually defined differently this situated linguistic behavior. Caroline Miller, Birkenkotter and Huckin, and a number of people from America, they actually look at it as typification of rhetorical action. What action a particular document, a particular genre entails, and how typical it is. This is what they do, and they actually have situations, at the back of their mind. Similarly, Martin, and I heard that you people have quite a bit of understanding of that. Martin claimed genre as are on the basis of regularities of staged, goal-oriented social processes. At one time, he talks about social processes, and the other time, he talks about stages. And it is closely related to SFL, systemic functional linguistics. But the one I'm going to take, and the approach that I'm going to take, that is a typical British approach, which defines genre on the basis of communicative purposes. What is the communicative purpose of a particular genre or a particular set of texts? I'm not talking about a single text, but I'm talking about a corpus of texts. So what is the communicative purpose? And this was actually published in 90, but I think before that, John Swales and I worked for about 10 years before that on developing this concept of genre. Let me give you the definition a little bit more detail. The genre as conventionalized communicative event. That is how John Swales described it. He defines genre as a class of communicative events, the members of which share a set of communicative purposes. Two things are important. It's a class of communicative events. We are not talking about a particular communicative event. We're talking about a group of, a class of, which means if we are talking about, say, audit reports, then we are talking about most of the audit reports that have been written, that are available, or they are likely to be written. So we are talking about the whole class of audit reports. The name is given by the society. And people who are the members of, accounting community, they share the communicative purpose. They know, all of them, they know that what is the purpose of this kind of audit report. So they share this kind of background and understanding. Now, these purposes are recognized by expert members of the parent discourse community. What is the parent discourse community? It means the people who are experts in that field, people who are valid and legitimate members of that professional community. So that is the parent. He calls it discourse community. I would like to call it a professional community. And all of them, they have a good recognition, a good understanding of these communicative purposes, because these communicative purposes, they constitute the criterion, the rationale for naming a particular genre. The rationale shapes the schematic structure. So this kind of rationale, which means communicative purpose, it shapes the schematic structure of discourse, or the move structure, what we call in genre theory, move structure of the genre. And it influences what sorts of things one may probably make use of, what sort of content you can actually make use of, what kind of style is appropriate to this particular genre. It's all based on the recognition of a communicative purpose. And communicative purpose thus is both a privileged criterion to identify a particular genre. So you identify genre primarily on the basis of communicative purpose. And that communicative purpose also keeps the scope of genre narrowly focused. A particular genre focuses on a particular rhetorical action. So the communicative purpose and the rationale, they control what kind of rhetorical action you can take on the basis of a particular genre. So this is how it was identified. But then much later, about 10 years later, I discovered that there were interesting developments which set me on a slightly more different path. And there was intriguing myths about genre analysis, which I discovered. For example, genres are conventionalized communicative events, as we have just described. We have just actually defined. But if they are conventionalized, they should not change. But in real practice, in the real world, they are constantly developing. I'm not saying they're constantly changing, but they constantly develop. People are actually make use of, the communicative purposes, the conventions and other things, and they try to develop, they try to be more creative, and they keep on modifying it in order to do certain other things. The second myth was genres have typical textualizations, that form function correlations. If there is a particular kind of function, a particular aspect of communicative purpose you want to realize, then you use a particular set of textual resources, lexicogrammatical resources. But in practice, we discovered that expert members of the professional communities, expert members, mind you, we're not talking about novices, expert members of the professional communities, they exploit these resources in order to create new patterns. And we'll be talking about these new patterns very soon. Now, genres also serve typically socially recognized communicative purposes. When I say socially recognized, that means all the members of a particular discourse community or professional community, they share these communicative purposes. But yet in practice, we often find genres being exploited to convey private intentions rather than socially recognized communicative purpose. Of course, the genres have communicative purposes which are socially shared by members of the parent community or even the new entrants. They share this, but yet, if you're an expert member, you know how to exploit that within the communicative purposes, you also have your private intentions. You want to say something which you are not allowed to say as part of the genre. But they have very clever ways of doing it. And that is where innovation, creativity comes in. So genres are not static, genres are dynamic. So people normally, initially, based on conventional genre analysis, thought that genres were very, very fixed. So you have a template and you can't actually go beyond it. But no, when you look at the real world, when you look at the real professional activities, then you find that people do exploit them for various other purposes as well. And I'll give you examples a little bit later. Now, we expect genres to have their individual identity and integrity. The fact that they are conventionalized, they are standardized, that means they have their individual identity and integrity, and we recognize them. But that is not by way of looking at a particular text. For example, if we say newspaper report is a genre, then most of us who are familiar with newspapers, who are familiar with news reporting, they have in their mind a kind of impression, yes, this is what a newspaper report should be like, or this is what I expect when I read a newspaper report. But if you look at the real examples, many examples over a period of time, over several, media houses, then you find in the real world, they are often seen in hybrid, mixed, or embedded forms. So purity or integrity of a particular genre is in a way marginally violated by creating hybrid genres or mixed genres or probably embedded genres. We'll try to make a distinction a little bit later. So what I'm trying to say is that one should not take genre analysis as a fixed way of writing, as if, you give actually a template to computers and computers can write instances of genres. No, that's not the way to do it. And that is not the way it is done. And that is not people expect you to do it. What you find is expert members, depending upon your expertise, depending upon how experienced you are, you can actually manipulate. Of course, within certain conditions, within certain constraints. There are always constraints. So you can go beyond these constraints and have some kind of a creative input, some kind of innovative aspect of genre, because you want to express not simply the socially recognized communicative purpose, but also your own private intentions. So these things are very easy to do for people who are experts. Okay, let's go a little bit further now. In 2004, when I started looking at the world outside, in 1993, when I wrote the first book on genre analysis, that was conventional genre analysis, because at that time, we were actually thinking of classroom. In the classroom, you need pure forms. But later on, about year 2000 or so, I was brought to this notice by several of my students who I would probably ask, go to the world outside and collect samples of different genres. And when they came back, I discovered that most of them were not instances of pure genres. They were complex. And quite interestingly, they were quite different. So what I did was, I proposed a 3-space model for the analysis of genres, or you call it text or whatever. And that was, you can either analyze a particular instance of text as text within a social textual space, within the space where we are talking only about texts. And of course, all you need for this is textual knowledge of the language, which is, vocabulary, grammar, semantics, and intertextuality, things of that kind. But then we discovered that we can go beyond it. And then we can discuss this as a genre. The moment you discuss this as a genre, you need a lot more information about the genre, not simply about the text. So you are actually within what I call socio-pragmatic space, which combines discourse as genre and discourse as professional practice. And this is a very powerful, very comprehensive, and difficult space where the whole world, whatever happens in the world of professions, that becomes a relevant contributor. You can even go further if you like, and you can look at discourse as social practice, as you normally do in critical discourse analysis, where you operate within social space and all you need is social knowledge, and of course, linguistic knowledge. So I'm not saying that you don't need linguistic knowledge for any other, you need linguistic knowledge. This is the basis, and you need everywhere. But it is possible for you to look at either as socio-critical practice or as professional practice or simply as textual practice. So when you look at textual practice, you are simply talking about discursive practices, how people construct these texts. But when you look at social practices, they say how society makes use of them, society at large. Now, we are less concerned with the right-hand side. We are concerned primarily with the professional practice today. And the professional practice takes place within a socio-pragmatic space. And that actually helps you to determine not only the background of the genre, not only to understand some of the questions I raised, but also lead you to appreciate what kind of professional expertise that people have who are established professionals. So let's actually go further from here. Now, critical genre analysis as interdiscursive performance. So what we are looking for is now critical genre analysis as interdiscursive performance. We are talking about performance. When we are talking about practice, we are talking about performance. And we are talking interdiscursively. We'll give you more information on that. And for that, we need some kind of a multi-perspective, multi-dimensional analytical framework. Now, I don't actually subscribe to a particular framework to solve all the problems, to solve all the questions that I raised initially. You require different frameworks and you want to combine them. And people who have been actually in applied linguistics for a long time, they must realize, and they probably know, that some 80s or early 90s, multi-method was considered, or eclectic method was considered a dirty word. People said, okay, if you are doing it multi-method, that means you don't know what you're doing. But today, when we talk about multi-perspective and multi-dimensional analytical frameworks, that is something in, because your loyalty is not to a particular framework. Your loyalty is to a particular analysis, the insights that you get from analysis of particular set of data, or data that may be genre-based, that may be text-based, that may be, any other format. So when you analyze data, your loyalty is with the data. And the data should be explained as much as possible. We don't want to go to one side of data and then make generalization. That reminds me of, a famous Indian fable. And I think most of you will probably be familiar with 6 blind men and an elephant. Now, the story goes that 6 blind men were asked to identify the elephant and go and feel elephant and then describe the elephant. And each one of them, one by one, they went to put their hands on some part of the body of the elephant, and then they described. So somebody who actually touched the tail always says, oh, yes, I know what elephant is. The elephant is like a rope. Or elephant is like a wall if they touch the body. Or elephant is like a wall if they actually touch the feet or legs. Or some of them actually, one of them touched the ears, and they say, oh, it's like a fan. Now, all of them are right in some sense, but all of them have a partial view. Nobody has seen the complete elephant. Nobody has described it. Now, that is same thing with any kind of discourse analysis. What we want to do is, when we actually combine different frameworks, we want to be able to see the whole of the elephant, not part of the elephant. Each framework has its own strong points. Each framework will give you very reliable insights into one aspect of text or your data, but not all aspects of data. So by working on critical genre analysis, what I wanted was to be able to see as much of the elephant as possible So that's why I suggested multiple perspectives, multi-perspective analysis. And of course, what sorts of things you analyze? Discursive acts, which means genres, the way they are written. This is what I said initially in the three-space model. The other thing is, which was not done in conventional genre analysis, analysis of professional practice. There's no point in describing genres, analyzing genres without the bigger context, without the situated context in which genres are enacted, the genres are used, the genres are exploited or manipulated. They are all part of professional practice. So genres don't exist unless they are part of a professional practice. The third thing which came to my mind, and that was something very, very comprehensive, which I did not realize in the 90s, but after about 2004 book, I realized that was that no text, no genre is entirely on its own. It is an appropriation from different ideas, different genres, different lexicogrammatical resources. They are interdiscursively connected, intertwined in order to create a particular genre, or what we call rhetorical action, or call it whatever you like, depending upon which framework you use. So this is the kind of framework I recommend for critical genre analysis. And if we do that, then we probably are not looking at the analysis of genres, but we are looking at the interdiscursive performance of people who make use of genres. So the focus is on interdiscursive performance. And also, when you talk about professional practice, when you talk about interdiscursivity, they are part of the context, much broader context. So you have to focus on the context, perhaps more than you focus on the text. In conventional genre analysis, we always focused on the text. And relatively, lip service was given to context, but context was only immediately surrounding the text. But I'm talking about context in a much, much bigger way, much more expanding kind of in system. How do we do that? One of the things that people asked me yesterday, that how do we analyze the context? How do we understand when we are not part of it? Then one of the frameworks which has become very handy, which has become very good, is what Graham Smart did in the 90s and probably early 80s in the name of interpretive ethnography. What did he mean? He worked in a bank for almost 8 years to discover how the bankers actually write their documents, how they process their documents, how they contribute to each other, and how the documents are written and used and exploited in banking context. And then he suggested interpretive ethnography, which means investigating how members of a specific professional community participate in the knowing and knowledge consuming activities, in the knowledge producing and knowledge consuming activities. How do they actually produce knowledge, which means produce text and produce genres, and then disseminate, pass it on to other people, to audiences within a particular professional culture. So this is what he suggested. You have to investigate. And also, he said, investigating the network of shared meanings constitute reality within a community, arriving at an account of community's meaning-making activity. Now, it's not simply studying one particular member, several people in that community. You address, you talk to them, you study them, you interview them, and you give them some kind of, questionnaires if necessary, or bring them together and then actually talk about the kinds of things they normally do, they habitually do. How do they make meanings? How do they actually account for the kind of meaning that these people are creating? So this kind of study is necessary. How does one do it? By studying convergent data. Now, convergent data could be oral or written. Written in the form of questionnaires, or perhaps focused questionnaires, or maybe perhaps guided questionnaires, and oral through interviews, interviews individually or interviews in a group interviews. But then the purpose is to have first-hand experiences of the community members. What are their experiences? And they may probably be novices, new members of the community. They may probably be very well-established, experienced members of the community. All of them have their different perspectives, their different perceptions, including, when you talk about including specialist terminology, and more importantly, the stories about historical development of the community. All of them actually experienced people, they have stories to tell, and the stories are quite interesting. I remember when we were doing actually a big project on international commercial arbitration, in which I had teams from 20 countries, more than 20, in fact, 22 countries participating in the project. And the teams consisted of discourse analysts, linguists, lawyers, arbitrators, arbitrations, companies. So all of them, and the legal firms, they were all part of that project. And we even went to Geneva to attend the World Conference on Arbitration. And there we listened to what these people were saying. We talked to them one by one. For a week, we were there and collecting their stories, collecting their information in order to learn how they do their work and why do they do it the way they do it. Very, very useful work, data and insights we got from there. So if you want to sum up, then says it's necessary to maintain a balance of engagement with and detachment from the local reality of the community. Now, when you do that, you should not be, in a way, influenced by their work or start thinking like them. No, because what happens is if you work actually with these people for a long period of time, then of course, you start thinking their way. So you have to engage yourself, but at the same time, you have to detach. This is what he calls engagement with and detachment from the local reality. It is necessary if one is to study the community in a way that encompasses both inner subjectivity and the differences. Sometimes some people you are interviewing and talking to, they will probably actually give you, their common perceptions, but there could also be differences. You have to actually balance them. You have to see both of them. How do you actually make use of them? And this represents the community's ideology while acknowledging other visions or versions of the world. So that is how you study a community, a professional community, as a member of a critical genre framework. So since we are focusing so much on contextualization, one may probably feel, and quite rightly, that critical genre analysis is more of a theory of contextualization rather than conventional genre analysis, which is the theory of textualization. It's not simply the text, but you extend it to the theory of contextualizations. And what are the key considerations? We have to integrate discursive and professional practices. We've talked about these two. Accounting for generic hybridity. Yes, the genres, they appear in hybrid forms. And of course, by doing that, you demystify interdiscursive performance. You understand and appreciate how interdiscursive performance takes place in a professional context. So these are the general considerations. How do we integrate? There are discursive practices and professional practices. How do we distinguish them? Now, discursive practices on the one hand and professional tasks and actions on the other hand. Now, discursive practices are the things which are typically focused on the writing process, creating discourses, maybe perhaps verbal, it may probably be written, it may probably be combination, it may be on television, whatever. These are the discursive practices. But there are professional practices which are like professional tasks or actions. Now, a simple thing is, take an example. If you actually buy a flat, then you go to a lawyer because the lawyer will probably arrange, the documents for you. Now, when you go there, ultimately what you get is an agreement or whatever document you have, the lease document or the buying document, and that is what you get. But the practice is the lawyer has to do a lot of things. He has to look at the validity of the space or the flat, whether there are any contradictions involved there, how much of money is actually given or not given, and how do you collect information from the land registry, from other sources, from the government offices. Now, all these are professional tasks and actions. Now, they are not reflected in the final document. So you have to combine the two because both of them, they work together. You can't have one without the other. So if you actually focus just on discursive practices, then of course you're doing a partial analysis, because they constitute each other. Discursive practices constitute and are in turn constituted, constrained, and empowered by professional practices. So professional practices determine what sort of discursive documents you use. And similarly, the discursive practices that you have, they actually also are used in professional practice. So they go hand in hand. When they are so closely tied, we can't separate them if we want to do critical genre analysis. So that's why we actually have focus on the context. The context is professional text and tasks and actions and things of that kind, which are outside the text. The second element we talked about is interdiscursivity, which is probably the most important aspect of critical genre theory, without which critical genre theory won't mean a lot. And the kinds of things I have here are genre in a socio-pragmatic space. Interdiscursivity works in a socio-pragmatic space. And I'm using Bakhtin's term, appropriation, to understand that. Intertextuality and interdiscursivity. Intertextuality, most of us actually know what it is, and we have been using it. In literature, we use it. With all applied linguistics, we use it. In discourse analysis, we use it. Whatever discourse analysis you do, intertextuality is very commonly used. So I don't want to talk too much about intertextuality. Take it as given. But interdiscursivity is relatively new. It hasn't been discussed a lot, and certainly not in genre theory or conventional genre theory. Now, interdiscursivity, they involve borrowing, or what Bakhtin meant, appropriation. So you appropriate various textual resources. If you borrow textual resources, you are in the area of intertextuality. But if you borrow generic or other semiotic resources or conventions or ways of doing or ideas from a different genre, from a different practice, from a different kind of context, then of course you are in the area of interdiscursivity. You are interdiscursively, appropriating from different practices, from different genres, from different professional cultures. Let me give a little bit more better view of that. Intertextuality, texts which are transformed, where they transform the past documents or texts into the present using prior one. Whatever you are writing today, and if you make use of certain parts of the text from prior text somebody else has written some time ago, it may be 20 years ago, it may be 100 years ago, but if it is listed there, then of course you can make use of it and you intertextually link it, and then you make it. And very commonly, we normally do whenever you... Now, this is, for example, I have written here Kosteva 1980, Foucault 1981, Bakhtin and all that. This is intertextual because I am actually referring to that when I'm talking about intertextuality and interdiscursivity. Interdiscursivity, on the other hand, is the appropriation of text external semiotic resources. Semiotic resources which are outside the text, across genres and professional practice, and even professional cultures. Let's look at a little bit more clearly now. So they go into different directions: appropriation across text internal resources or text external resources. The generic resources, if you borrow from a different genre, then of course you are doing it interdiscursively. If you borrow from a different text, then of course you are doing intertextuality, right? But both of them can coexist. Both of them can be found in the same text. So when you write something, you can make use of both of them, intertextual links and interdiscursive influences. You can appropriate both of them at the same time. And that's what people normally do. Now, let me display it a little bit further. What are the implications of this? What happens when we appropriate generic resources? Now, what are those? And I'm only talking about interdiscursivity now, text external resources. And text external resources are professional genres, professional practices, professional cultures. It's possible for an accountant to make use of certain aspects of legal genres in order to make a point, or vice versa. And that is where interdisciplinary communication comes in. And this is very, very common. In practice, if you think, imagine there is a high-level meeting in a particular corporation where you have people from different departments, Department of Technology, Department of Scientific Research, Department of Law, Accounting, Marketing, all of them are present. And all of them contribute in different ways. They give their arguments, they give their own way of looking at it, they actually display their mindset, and then ultimately a conclusion is arrived at. And when the conclusion is arrived at, kind of action they take, that action reflects contributions from different disciplines or disciplinary factors or resources. They also borrow from each other's practices, and quite importantly, which is very difficult to perceive, but it can be analyzed, they actually borrow across different cultures. Lawyers have their own culture, marketing people think differently, accountants think differently, so their mindsets are different. But in the final document, when it is written, when there is final, decision which is taken, either written or in speech or whatever, when it is summarized, they actually borrow from different professional cultures. Now, this is what I call interdiscursivity, and this happens a lot in professional context. So professionals normally work like that. I remember when we were talking about a project in PR industry, public relations industry in Hong Kong, there was one particular company which made a statement by saying that we don't write anything originally. We have nothing original to write for every project because we have templates, we have earlier experiences which people have written, and we have actually presented as elements or as aspects of our company, and we use them again and again and again and again. He says, in fact, there's nothing original. And when we talk about it, there are several people who contribute at the same time. So every document is written collaboratively. Every document is written in the context of what has existed before. So this is the way typically in businesses people work. In legal community, I worked with a legislative, setup in England, Whitehall, the biggest actually, setup for writing legislation. And I discovered that they always have, on a particular law they want to write, they had a team of people. There's not one person, but team of people. And the voices from the parliament, voices from the society, voices from other people, they were all reflected in the final document. So it's all collaboratively done. The result of that is, if you borrow, then what happens is interdiscursive hybrids you create. You create hybrids, which may probably be mixing of genres, which may be embedding of genres, or even bending of genres, generic norms. Sometimes you bend those norms. I don't want to talk too much about that because we don't have enough time to do this, but we will illustrate some of it, hybridity, in the later half of the talk. But give you a flavor of how different genres are embedded one within the other. And nothing could be a better example than promotional genres. Now, promotional genres, they invade the territorial integrity of many, many different genres, almost all the genres that we can think of. For example, academic discourse. When you talk about academic discourse, look at, the advertisements from the universities these days to admit students. Now, whenever these things are published, you can find there is an element of promotion because they want to promote the image of the university. Thanks to the ranking, which takes place internationally. Promotion is always part of it. Even the course descriptions, when the different teachers, they compete with others for elective courses, they write courses in an attractive manner so that they can get more students. Job advertisements, they have the same element where it's the description of the job and also the attractiveness of the job. How do they make it attractive? So there is an element of promotion. Corporate and financial reviews, very common, very common. Corporate discourse, annual reports, company brochures, financial statements, investment brochures, all of them to a large extent, not reports, not descriptive entirely, but there is an element of promotion. And we are going to have in great detail one of the elements that we'll be talking about, the annual reports, corporate disclosure practices, a little bit later. Yes. And of course, I did the analysis of philanthropic fundraising discourses, which we are very familiar with. We do get actually instances of that in our, people writing to you or different organizations writing to you for, contributing to those causes. But when we looked at it, we discovered that there was actually, the strategies in fundraising discourses that people were borrowing from marketing. Because both of them were concerned with accumulating money, getting money from different people. So they actually had strategies which were common to them. So they were using promotional strategies quite a lot. And of course, job descriptions and advertisements I talked about, yes, people are writing a lot more about the university or a particular company when they advertise a job, but in order to make the company and the job more attractive. Many a times I have discovered that the description of job is minimal, but the description of the company or the university is about 70–80%. So this is quite common. And the result of that is the hybrids. As I said, advertisements, they are the main contributors, promotional. They are the main contributors to this kind of invasion. And if you look at the general picture, this is what it looks like. You have advertisements. You have advertisements in sales promotion letters. You have advertisements in book blurbs. which we talked about 2 days ago, even reference letters these days, they have a bit of advertising, and particularly so in the present context where people who are the target of reference letters, they can go to the courts and they can find out, or they can sue the person who has written a reference if it is negatively reflected in their reference. Job advertisements, of course, there's a bit of advertising, but you can go beyond it and look at this one now. You have all kinds of genres, grant proposals. They are proposals, but they are also promotional because they want to attract grants. Annual reports are promotional. Advertorials are a combination of two, editorial and advertisements. Company brochures, they are mostly promotional. Film reviews can be promotional, partly promotional. They have at least some relationship. Social responsibility reports, book reviews, fundraising letters, travel brochures, they all have elements of promotion, elements of advertising in it. So this is large-scale invasion of other genres, which are reporting, descriptive in one sense, but they all have elements of promotion in it. Let us look at, I call it a colony of promotional genres. So there are central members and there are peripheral members. And that is how and all of them are hybrids in a sense. Let us look at reports now. A similar picture. You can have reports, general reports like progress report, process report, field report, performance report, or first information report, FIR, what you call, when you go to the police station to report something, a crime or something. But in addition to that, there are disciplinary reports, technical reports, scientific report, medical report. You go for a medical test and you get a report, sports reporting, news events, news reports, finance report, audit report, sales report, all kinds of, and law reports, which are all. Now, all of them in one sense are reports. But in different disciplines, this reporting element is common to them. So that brings in quite a lot of commonality, quite a lot of hybridity in the world of reports. They all have something common and they all have some differences. So if you consider medical report, the medical report is a report to a large extent, but yes, there are other things in it too. And it's a very specific report. It's different from a sports report, different from a law report, and different from a sales report. Similarly, even if you look at introduction as a genre, then you say article introduction, foreword in a book, preface in a book, or book introduction, they are all introductions. Now, all of them have different, slightly different communicative purposes, but there is a lot in common. But in addition to that, there are a number of other introductions. I have listed only 3 or 4 extra here, but there are many, many, many more. Like introduction letter, you introduce somebody to somebody else or a particular company. It may be plant introductions, which is very, very common in biology, zoology, no, not zoology, botany. Speaker introduction, you introduce a speaker. That's again an introduction. You introduce a government policy. So they're all introductions. They all have common elements, but all of them are different in another sense. So they all form some kind of a colony of introductory genres, and they actually are hybrids of various kinds, distinguished in terms different from each other. So all of them are distinguished in certain respects, but all have a common element underlying. So common denominator is report, but there are different genres. Now, I think there comes a time when we have to take a break. I think I'll probably take a break for about 5 minutes. I need a break.
You okay?
And, okay?
Okay, 5 minutes break.
Yes, 5 minutes break.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, shall we start?
So, yes, thank you.
Okay, now in the second half, I want to do actually a complete analysis as far as possible that I can do in about 45 minutes or so, whatever I can do, of not simply the genre, but also the practice. I want to combine the two. So that is one way of illustrating how to do critical genre analysis. Now, most of the time, when this was a project that I uh, took on myself. I was funded by the government here. And this was the result of something happening in the world from where I got the inspiration. So the inspiration for this came from the collapse of Enron and WorldCom. You remember the two companies, huge companies in America, they collapsed in 2001, sometime in September, October. They went for bankruptcy. And the whole world was shocked by that because these were the two companies, they were very, very big companies. They were doing wonderfully well. Their annual reports, suggested that they are probably doing extremely well, much, much better than most of the companies in the world. But all of a sudden, they collapsed. And there were a number of questions that were raised. And I started thinking myself, what's wrong? What happened? Then I looked at Enron and what exactly were they talking to people about just before their collapse. And what I discovered from their annual reports was it was one of the largest companies in the USA. Now, these are the words that came from their annual report, which was published in 2001, sometime in March. And they said Enron is one of the largest companies in the US, and it reported revenues of 101 billion in the year 2000. So the report was based on the work, the health of the company in year 2000, which was 101 billion. You can imagine the size of the company. And they filed for bankruptcy in less than a year. What happened? In 1 year, you actually report a revenue of 101 billion, and within a month, less than a year, you become bankrupt. So it was shocking for everyone in this world. It lost share value from $80 to 40 cents in less than a year. And when I looked at annual report, I looked at the claims that Enron was making. Enron's performance in 2000 was success by any measure. This is from the report, which came out in March 2001. We continue to outdistance the competition and solidify our leadership. In our largest business, we experienced an enormous increase of 59%. How many companies can boast of 59% increase in their business? Our newest business significantly accelerated transaction activity. Even the new business that they started, even that accelerated transaction. Our oldest business registered increased earnings. Was there anything negative? The company's net income reached 1.3 billion in 2000. This was their profit, the level of profit. And then still, within a matter of few months, 7-8 months, they filed for bankruptcy. Enron has built unique and strong businesses that have tremendous opportunities for growth. Big claims. Our size, experience, and skills give us enormous competitive advantage. They had competitive advantage over other competitors. Our targeted markets are undergoing fundamental changes. tighter supply, higher prices, and increased volatility. That was the only thing which actually indicated as if there was something to worry about, or the difficult circumstances, not to worry about, but difficult circumstances for 2001. But look at the promises they were making. That was something very significant. Enron is in a unique position to provide the products and services. Enron is laser focused on earnings per share. We expect to continue strong earnings performance. We have unparalleled liquidity, of course, with a profit of 101 billion, 1.3 billion. They had unparalleled liquidity and market making ability. The market making abilities, they could actually control the market, they could rule the market. That was the kind of the size of the company. They had robust networks of strategic assets, innovative technology, they claimed, to deliver products and services at the lowest cost. What else do we need to succeed in the corporate world? And they had risk management skills. Even if there's a risk, they had good management skills. But in spite of all that, January 2001, the stock market was, Enron shares were 81.39, $81 on January 25th. And December 2001, stock price went down to 40 cents. Can you imagine? On 2nd of December, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, the largest bankruptcy protection application in the US history. So Enron stock market collapse. It was exceptional by any standards. What was the result of that? As soon as they filed for bankruptcy, there were multiple perspectives on corporate disclosures. What exactly were they telling shareholders? What were they disclosing to people who were concerned with it, their shareholders? Corporate accounting people got worried about it, and they started looking for opportunities to do research and find out what was happening, because this worried corporate accounting people. Banking and investment people were affected by this. Business law people were affected by this, that there should be some kind of a law to see why the businesses can do what they have done. Stock market was rattled. Financial accounting, they also got worried about it. There were different perspectives, all of them. Business ethics people, they had their own perspective. Bankruptcy community, they had their own perspective. And having looked at all these, I thought there was a linguistic perspective too. I wanted to look at what sorts of things these companies, corporations, they communicate, how they communicate the health of their company to their shareholders. That was my problem. That was my issue. I couldn't have done that in the case of Enron, because I did not want to study one particular company. I wanted to study the professional, the business practices of most of the companies, whether there was something in common, something in the mindset, something in the business culture, which allows them to do it, something which was commonly shared by different companies. And I wanted to do something which was closer to my workplace, that is Hong Kong. And from there, critical genre theory, genre analysis was confirmed at the end. And let me tell you how we did it and what we did. I identified 15 companies, all listed in Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and grouped by their financial performance in the preceding 5 years. I asked actually professionals, business professionals, to give me a list of 15 companies from stock exchange, 5 of them consistently for 5 years giving good performance, 5 of them giving average performance, and 5 of them reflecting poor performance. So I had 15 companies who had performed very well, average performance, or poor performance in the last 5 years. Now, I'm not going to name those companies because it's not the individual company that is the target. I wanted to study the process. I wanted to study what happens, what's the culture. Wanted to study the mindset of people who actually communicate and how they communicate to their shareholders or their audiences. Now, what kind of data I wanted to study? There was primary and secondary data. Primary data was corporate disclosure documents like annual and interim reports. Stock exchange and the local governments, they always forced companies to disclose their health, their activities, and their profits and all those things annually, or some countries, there were interim reports. In Hong Kong, they also have 6 monthly reports, interim reports. So these were one good indication of how they communicated with their shareholders and other, interested people. Now, they also had earnings and results announcements. They normally announce these earnings and results in the press, in press conferences or shareholders' meetings. And also they had press releases many a times. So we collected most of these documents from those 15 companies. Secondary data, this was not enough. We thought we wanted to study actually how the people who constitute the audience, they reacted to it. How did they interpret these things? So we collected secondary data. That was shareholder circulars. They normally send circulars to shareholders. What do they say to shareholders? Notes from general meetings. When they had meetings, there were indications. And we wanted to study that as well, whether that had any relationship and that created any kind of hybridity to the main documents, the annual and annual corporate disclosure documents. Transcripts and slides from speeches and presentations normally present to new investors. And they normally have transcripts, slides, the kinds of things, which they want to impress upon the new investors. Corporate publications, company newsletters, sometimes they had good information. And above all, the most interesting thing was newspaper reports or magazine articles, reports on these companies, particularly when the earnings and results announcements were made. The moment a company announces results, the next day in the newspapers, you will have some kind of an authoritative report from newspaper specialists in business, and they give their reactions. So that is what we mean by multiple perspectives, multi-perspective analysis. So we wanted to have both sets of data, primary and secondary data. And we collected quite a lot of it. Sometimes the data was not given to us, and we did have to buy actually shares in order to attend the meetings, or we had to get in touch with people who were actually shareholders and sought their help to get information. But then we focused on one element, annual corporate reports, which we actually considered as the corporate disclosure, part of their corporate disclosure practice. It was not just a report, it was a practice, a business practice, and we wanted to study the business practice. When we looked at the report, there are several kinds of data, linguistic data that you get. There was the discourse of accounting, which was the basis for the preparation of accounts. The main element or the main contribution in the report was in the form of discourse of accounting. And discourse of accounting, there was just the tables and lots of financial data, the numbers, charts, diagrams, and things of that kind. In terms of what they had written, what was certified by public accountants, because all annual reports have to be certified by public accountants. This is a national government requirement. So all we discovered was the statement like this: the basis of consolidation, all material intercompany transactions and balances are eliminated on consolidation. Goodwill arising on the acquisition of subsidiaries being the excess of the cost of investments in these companies over the fair value of the group's share of the separable net assets acquired is written off against reserves in the year in which it arises. In our opinion, the accounts give a true and fair view of the state of affairs of the company. And this is a standard declaration they actually give at the end of the corporate report. And then it's signed by public accountants, certified by public accountants. This was in the form of the main document. This consisted of about 60 to 70% of the annual report, but largely consisting of tables and diagrams and all charts, and all giving numbers like so many million, 350 million in this and that. They were all accounting information. Then there was a sizable section, which is generally referred to as financial review section, which is something like this. The names of the companies have been deleted, sanitized. The company reported an attributable profit of this many millions against a profit of amount millions in 2002. The significant decrease in profit was due to the sharp fall in passenger numbers during the SARS outbreak. Group turnover reduced by 10.6%, and it goes on like this. So this was the second kind of discourse. Then there was the chairman's letter to shareholders. And if you look at some of the things that they normally include are this: the year saw a dramatic reversal of global sentiment towards investment in technology, media, and telecommunication. In response, we have taken a prudent approach and made substantial provisions against the value of certain investment securities. Going forward, we intend to maintain a very cautious approach to taking minority investment positions. We'll continue to invest prudently within our resource capacity to enable us to offer our customers total solutions. We have a stable cash flow, well-established customer relationships, and a focused team to execute our plans to operate a solid growth enterprise. You can see the kinds of sentiments which are reflected here, mostly positive. And then, strangely enough, you also have a legal disclaimer, what people call legal disclaimer. And it is normally termed as forward-looking statements. And this generally is in this following form. This annual report contains forward-looking statements, which are not historical facts. They are not factual, and they may not be true, and probably they are not true. Rather, the forward-looking statements are based on the current beliefs. Mind the words, the current beliefs, assumptions, expectations, estimates, projections of the directors and management about its business and the industry and markets in which it operates. Their beliefs, their assumptions, expectations, nothing is factual. These forward-looking statements include without limitation statements relating to revenues and earnings. The words like believe, intend, expect, anticipate, project, estimate, predict, and similar expressions are all intended to identify forward-looking statements. And annual reports are full of these sentiments. These statements are not guarantees of future performance. So reliance should not be placed on these forward-looking statements, which simply means whatever we are telling you here, don't trust us. Don't blame us if it doesn't turn out to be right. Now that is what you call negating everything, every promise that is being made earlier on. So in the chairman's statement, in the financial statements, financial review section, whatever promises, whatever results are given, you should not actually trust them because they are not factual and they are not historically true. Now, all these 4 different kinds of discourses you find in most annual reports. Now, whether these reports come from companies which are very well established or the companies who have performed moderately well, or even the companies who have performed very weakly, poorly in the last 5 years, the sentiments reflected are just the same. Now, that was very intriguing and very interesting for us. So we looked at, first, we looked at the analysis of the chairman's statement. These were the 4 discourses of 4 different subgenres or genres, you may probably think. They consist of annual corporate report. There's an audit report, there's a financial review, there's a chairman's letter, and there's a legal disclaimer. How are these written? Factual account only in the audit report. Financial review is some kind of an informed opinion. It is opinion, but it is based on the factual information. And as you know, statistics, as one of the old prime ministers of Britain said, statistics lie. He says there are 3 kinds of lies. Lies, extreme lies, damn lies or dirty lies, or statistics. So statistics is the worst form of lying. So you can pick and choose statistics, parts of statistics, in order to make any kind of statement. So in financial review, they pick things which are supportive of their claims, and they ignore things which are not supportive of their claims. So that is a recontextualization of financial review, and the chairman's letter is more speculative. It only indicates expectations. What they expect may or may not be true. Or maybe perhaps in the heart of their heart, they know that this is not going to be true. But still, they make a claim. Still, they make promises. And if the promises do not work very well, and the next year the performance is really bad and the company suffers further losses, then of course, they're free of any kind of legal claims. You can't actually go to the court of law and to say that the company has misled or given wrong information, misinformed shareholders, because they will say, we sent you a legal disclaimer. We wrote very clearly, don't trust us. These are our expectations. So legal disclaimer is a damage controlling discourse for them. Now, how do we interpret that linguistically now, interdiscursively? There's an accounting discourse, which gives you accounting information mostly. Accounting information is recontextualized, or selection of accounting information is recontextualized in the discourse of finance. And people think, and partly they're right, that the discourse of finance is based on accounting discourse. And it generally is. But at the same time, what is playing there is a selection of statistical information, selection of numbers, making generalizations on the basis of some parts of it. And then, of course, this recontextualized information is further recontextualized, further reframed into some kind of a promotion of selected account information. They promote it. This is a public relation discourse. Accounting chairman's letter is a public relation discourse. And it's more promotional. So that's how a factual report becomes partly factual, and then it becomes completely fictional. And if it's likely to do any damage, then of course you have a legal disclaimer to take care of that. So this is the kind of interdiscursivity in corporate disclosure practices we find. If you consider just the discourse, the annual report, you will probably claim annual report is a genre, and annual report has these parts, and these are the moves, and this is what they say. But if you consider that as practice, then of course there's a lot of information which is hidden underneath. And that hidden information you have to discover. And it's not easy to do it. Let's take an example and see how it works. So reframing of accounting discourse for promotional purposes, this is how they reframe it. Now, this is what we call the essence of interdiscursivity in corporate disclosure practices, because you don't see that in the discourse so clearly. But we want to go to the practice and discover what are the practices. How do we actually analyze practices now? Let us look at this chairman's, and this is not a real example, but this is based on real examples, because we are not supposed to give actually a real example of any particular company, because the company can sue you, can create problems for you. But we were more interested in the sentiments, the way genre is written. So it is some kind of partly based on what we discovered in so many company annual reports. So the letters generally begins with, I'm pleased to present our interim results for the 6 months ended 30th of June 2002 on behalf of my fellow directors. It's now 2 years since the merger of this, and it goes on like this. Let us actually look at it more detail in a different form. Yes, focus on the sections in the red. I'm pleased to present our interim results. I'm pleased. The progress we have made and the challenges ahead. Okay, there are always challenges, but the progress is. Now, all the companies, whether they have performed badly, they have performed moderately, or they performed well, they have similar sentiments. They all actually make progress. And they always, sometimes more than others, they talk about challenges ahead. We have concentrated on and successfully pursued 3 objectives. First, we have responded to poor economic environment. Now, when it is poor, it's not their company, it's the environment. If they haven't done very well, they have always done very well, but if the results are not that good, then it is because of the poor economic environment and the competition in our industry. And it goes on like this. And they say, secondly and thirdly, we have brought together a world-class management team, broad industry experience, strong leadership qualities, increased operating efficiencies. All these things are reflected even in Enron 2001 report, similar to that. But this is in Hong Kong, and that was in America. But the sentiments are similar. The discourses are similar. The practice is more or less the same. Let's actually do lexicogrammatical analysis, see if there are any indications. Now, the text contains a very high incidence of present perfect. The fact that there are so many indications of present perfect, and all of them are positive. All of them are positive. That means they have accomplished. So there is an indication of accomplishment, doing well. And there are verb forms that project future expectations. Again, has been positioned to prosper, will be able to exploit opportunities and things of that kind. Now, it also contains very high incidence of three kinds of nominals. And what are they? The progress, the challenges, the merger, objectives, economic environment, intense competition. These are all words, buzzwords in the corporate world. Now that gives the impression that the writer, when they talk about these things in these terms, they know what they're talking about, just to impress upon their audiences. And then, of course, yes, more positive ones. Operating efficiencies, financial flexibility, prudent level. Prudent is actually a buzzword in today's context. Everybody does. Whether you invest prudently. You spend prudently, because everything is done prudently. Overall funding costs, productivity gains, and all these are technical terminologies, but they all reflect positive attitudes. And of course, yes, finally, the third set, a world-class management team, broad industry experience, and things of that. It goes on like this. Now, this is what you actually discover when you do analysis, a conventional analysis of genres. And on this basis, you normally feel everything seems to be okay. You got a very clear picture, very positive picture, says everything seems to be okay. But the moment you look at practice, the moment you look at the culture, the moment you look at their, because ways of doing things, then of course you discover interesting things. Let's see how we did it. And if you look at move structure, of course, yes, rhetorical structure, they normally have, this sort of division. The move one is opening, overview of the review period, operating strategies, and major themes. Now, when you talk about report should be majorly based on past, isn't it? You're reporting your wares, your profits, or your losses, or you're reporting health of the company in the past year. But in the past, there's very little. Of course, two is little bit, but that is very nominal. Most of the time, they're talking about expectations and promises, prospects, looking forward, and occasionally expressions of gratitude to their own people. And then, of course, very polite, promising closing. So you can see very clearly the way time works. The report should be on the past, about the past, but the letter is about future, present and future, mostly present and future. And then there are very good lexicogrammatical indications. So far, looks good, irrespective of the fact that your company has performed well, moderately well, or probably poorly. Doesn't matter. So all of them are right the same way. So past events, very few, future events, a lot. In fact, in most cases, 60 to 70% of the discourse focuses on future events. Then what we did was we compared the claimed performance by some of the companies and the media perceptions of it, how they claimed, what they claimed, and what the specialists in the media, in the newspapers and journals and elsewhere, they said. So the bit of detective work we needed to do, and we put them side by side and see what happens. Claimed performance in 2001 report was a solid store value in its various property and other assets. Whereas the media says share price has fallen by more than 80%. You said share value solid, but the share value has gone down. Established a solid capital structure, but the media says you have incurred huge negative equity. Improved capital structure, the burst of internet bubble and the collapse in the company's share price has dented these hopes. And he says the hopes are that we are doing very well, but say these are only hopes. No layoffs, better positioned for growth, growth in revenue, that these are only hopes. There is no basis for it. So you can see actually how media responds to these things. And you get actually this kind of data if you do actually close analysis, if you look at the interdiscursivity of different kinds of documents all around, and you put them side by side and see the influence and interpret them in that context, then you will find the reality. So there are actually things which contradict each other quite a lot. Then what we did was, okay, there is a discrepancy. There are actually interesting things coming up. We wanted to talk to people who were responsible for writing this. Now, it was impossible for us to get a particular company and talk about their people, talk to their people about their company. It was difficult to do it. But what we normally do is we look at the experts and ask them about the general perception, how they do, in order to know their mindset, in order to know how they think. And two sets of people we had: public relations manager, who was responsible for writing the chairman's letter. Although the chairman signs it, but it's not the chairman who writes, it's the public relations office, right? And we asked them questions. And we discovered that the chairman's statement in a company report is the PR's job, publications. At times, when profit is not so good, her role as a PR manager is to manage the sentiments of the public and the shareholders so as not to make any dramatic share price movement. How telling, how interesting. This is never reflected, but this is the private intention they have. They said, even if the company hasn't done very well, we have to manage the sentiments of the company and also the shareholders. We have to write it in such a way that people don't sell their shares and they don't desert the company. Because if they sell their share, the share price will go further down. So they have to balance it. How do they balance it? This involved management of tone and manner of writing the reports, as well as meeting the expectations of the management. So they do actually combine. They call it management of tone. And that's a very polite way of saying that we write what we don't mean. What we write is not factual, and it's not based on accounting information. It's all fictional. When asked who gets the blame for a good picture when company's performance is bad, her reply was, don't know. So don't blame me. You don't take the blame. It's okay. If that's the case, let's go to the chartered accountants, public accountants, because they are the people who are authorized to sign. They sign the report, annual report. So we just wanted to go and talk to them. And this is what we discovered. And said accountant's job is to note any inconsistencies in the company reports and to go through the banking mechanism of the management. Said our job is just to go through the company report and go through the banking mechanism. Accountants are not responsible for the forecasting of the company's future. This is the job of the investors. That is something interesting. Says it's not the job of the company. It's not the job of the public relation manager. It's not the job of the chairman or chief executive of the company. It's the job of the investor. You have to see and read between the lines. You have to interpret it in order to find out whether a company has a future or not. In Hong Kong, the stock exchange has a system of class action made up of shareholders which keep an eye on auditors who must show a clean hand. It says, we have a clean hand. The accountant whose name appears in the public is accountable to the stock exchange for every word said in public. Therefore, he has to be very cautious. It's that we are responsible to the stock exchange. It's your job to interpret it. Now, how can the shareholders, and particularly those shareholders who are not professionals, and these are many, many millions of people who invest their savings, people like you and me who invest their savings in shares, hoping that it will give us some return. But if you think of the mindset of the people, business people, the culture of business people, the practices, standard practices in the business community, then you will discover these are two different worlds. What is written on the product, the document, or the artifact, whatever you call it, annual report, and whatever the basis, what are the private intentions underneath, they are, or they can be very different. So there is always a tension between the positive evaluation of the company's performance and the need to hedge the expectations of good performance. You always have to hedge it. They speculate about future outlook, especially if there are uncertainties about future performance. So they always have to do that. And this is done by mixing two or more genres. Accounting genre, which forms a major part of annual report, duly endorsed, certified, and signed by the public accountants, and the public relation genres, which through company annual reports, but are constructed, designed, and executed by public relation personnel, and for which public accounting firms do not take any responsibility. Although it is signed, the whole report is signed by public accountants, but they don't take any responsibility for any promotional work. He says this is the job of the investor. You are on your own. So this is what corporate disclosure practices are all about. Now let us briefly summarize now what we have talked about. The world of professional practice. We as teachers, we look at pure genres because this is our pedagogical world, because we are the teachers of discourse. We look at the pedagogic world, but there is the world of professions. In the pedagogic classroom, we have pure genres, but in the world of professions, there are hybrid genres. The two are very different. Hybrid genres are very complex, whereas pure genres are simple. But if you want to look for pure genres, you may have to actually, go through about 200 examples in order to find 5 good examples of pure genres. And mind you, I'm speaking from my own experience. And of course, for the analysts, people like you and me, they are interdiscursively connected. So interdiscursivity is actually the most powerful framework which will connect the pedagogic world and the world of professions. And of course, it all takes place within the context of professional practice and professional culture. How do you become an expert? If you handle all these things, if you can differentiate between pure genres and hybrid genres, and you can see the interdiscursive relations and how to exploit within the context of professional practice and culture, then of course, that is what we call interdiscursive performance, that you can perform interdiscursively. So finally, this is what we have done in the name of critical genre theory. We started off with genre analysis, focused next on professional practice and professional culture through interdiscursive means. And by doing that, we have been able to demystify discursive performance, to go underneath these practices and make it more apparent to some extent. And if you do that, then of course, yes, you can become, or you can say you have succeeded in understanding, clarifying professional practice. And this is what I call critical genre analysis as the theory of interdiscursive performance. So I stop there. There are references. And about the speaker. Okay.
Amazing, amazing lecture, Prof.
Thank you.
Yusuf, maybe there are some questions for Professor to be asked. Prof, thank you very much for the first lecture.
There are many questions, Prof, in the chat box. I think that the students are very interested in this topic. The first question from MA student, Jikti Khairina. Prof, could you please explain that interdiscursivity can make genre mixing, embedding, and bedding? Could you please exemplify genre bending?
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Now, when we talk about genre mixing, which means you mix two genres, to bring two genres together, and they serve both communicative purposes at the same time. Both purposes at the same time. Let me give you an example. You might have seen, advertorials, which means in certain magazines and so there are editorials, but those editorials also promote certain things. And this happens in cases where, particularly when we talk about practices in property selling, property magazines, there are editorials. They look like editorials. They are given this editorial. Most of it is editorial, but at the same time, underneath, they promote a particular kind of property. And this is very cleverly combined into one document. You have advertisements, many advertisements, which are actually in the form of, you can say, a scientific report. It looks like scientific report, but actually they are advertisements. Now that is one genre is embedded within the other. So they use scientific report format in order to give the people a kind of satisfaction that whatever I'm talking about is based on science, but it is an advertisement. It has nothing to do with science. There are a number of other documents, in fact, most of the things that we write, they have elements of promotion in it. When you write your CV for a job, what do? You write a fictional self. It is not your CV, which is not factual. It is factual, but you actually make it attractive for your reader, right, or audience. And there are certain things you pick and choose, and you put them in such a way that they give you the description of the person, the expertise of the person, but at the same time in such a manner that it promotes your services. your expertise. We all do that. This example I gave you, annual report, this is a mixture of two genres, or four genres, different genres, not two, but four. Because it serves all the purposes at the same time. But how do you do that? Unless you interdiscursively analyze them, you won't realize. You will think that this is one annual report, which is signed by, chartered accountant. And because chartered accountant signed it and you trust the chartered accountant, so everything is at face value. But unless you interdiscursively dissect it, interdiscursively separate them, and think each of them, which is mixed, and it serves several purposes. It serves the purpose of reporting, it serves the purpose of description, it serves the purpose of financial management, it serves the legal purpose, and it also serves the promotional purpose. So this is a mixed kind of genre. Now, bending is slightly different. Bending is very subtle, where you actually put in private, you bend the conventions of genre. I'll give you an example from your practice, perhaps. I think we all probably at times must have seen, and this is a real example I'm giving you. I was giving a conference paper. The conference was, I won't name the city where it was, or the university. The conference was organized on the basis of 10 invited speakers. It's only the invited speakers who were allowed to participate, to give papers. And the audience contained something like about 200 people. But there were only 10 people who were selected, were invited to give their talks. And that was the first time. This was about 20 years ago, or more than 20 years. It was about 30 years ago. I used the word private intentions. And somebody asked me from the audience, and I used the word genre bending. And they said, what is this genre bending? Can you explain it? I thought for a moment what sort of example I can take. But at the same time, it just struck to me that in that very conference, there was at least one person, a good academic, well-established local academic, and he had the habit of asking questions. So he can ask questions, but he wasn't allowed to give a paper because he was not invited to give a paper. So what he did was, he made use of this question hour, and his question to me took about 10 minutes to ask a question. And the response was only about half a minute. And I said, if something like that happens, and the moment I mentioned, there were 200 eyes that turned to him, and everybody recognized that this is what bending of the genre is, bending of the norms. The norm is you are not allowed to give a lecture, but the convention is it allows you to ask a question. So what you do is you bend the conventions of question asking and turn it into some kind of a mini lecture. And when you do that, then of course you are bending the norms, bending the conventions. So that was one example which I gave long time ago, when the first time I started talking about genre bending. Does that make sense?
Yes, very makes sense. Yeah.
And this is a real example.
Dictate, yes, dictate.
It's a real example from closer to home, closer to you. Yes. Okay. It happened in Singapore.
Okay.
The second question, Prof.
Yes. Yes.
From Dr. Mas Diana. She asked, may I say that the concept you propose start from the text production, or how a text is produced by a professional and related with the socio-cultural context to get the discourse of a professional? Can you give more explanation? Because she is doubtful whether she misunderstands it, Prof.
I don't get the question because I don't know what she actually wants. You say
how
the production
text is
of
produced,
text.
Prof. how text is produced by a professional and
Yes.
related with the socio-cultural context to get the discourse of it.
Now, what happens is you don't do it consciously. It has something to do with identity of the person, the writer, right? Now, identity construction is a very complex issue. It's not as simple. For example, if you are writing, for example, if I write an article, and my article, when it is written, it reflects my identity as an academic. It's a research writing. My academic identity as a researcher is reflected there. But at the same time, it also reflects the identity in part of the journal I'm writing to, because you modify your style, you modify your things in the light of the journals, in the light of the reviewers who are going to look at you. It also reflects my personal style, because people can recognize me. Oh, this is written by Bhatia. We know it. So it reflects my identity as well. And at the same time, it's possible in my case or in anybody's case, you reflect your ethnic identity at the same time. That is what people normally talked about. Yesterday, we were talking about Indian English or native English. Now that identity can also be reflected. So identity construction or the discourse construction, when we talk about the different kinds of identities which can be reflected. So it is a complex issue, and it requires quite a bit of work in order to, disengage it. But it's possible to do it, yes. It's part of socio-critical aspect of socio-political or socio-critical aspect, in fact, socio-pragmatics of identity. But we normally don't talk about it when we talk about professional discourse. We ignore the personal identity of a person. We ignore the personal identity of a person's, background. We only talk about the professional identity and not social identity. That means the identity as a professional. And that's why we say most of the lawyers, they write the same way. Most of the accountants write the same way. Most of the academics, they have a common ways of writing and thinking. So it is related to what I call, the professional culture of each profession.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
We still have another question, Prof.
Yes.
From Miss Maya Sari. Your theoretical framework is something new to us. We are very much interested on reread your material to enrich our knowledge. Thank you so much, Prof. Oh, I think just acknowledgement, Prof.
Thank you so much.
The other one is from...
I'm glad it's useful. Yes.
From Dr. Candidate Akmal Shafa. Your explanation on primary and secondary data are very helpful for a beginner like me. I am interested in analyzing professional text, Prof. As far as it is concerned, companies won't lend us this data. So the problem is about the company's data. Sometimes it is hard to get it, Prof.
It is difficult to get it. Yes, I know. Yes. No, but these days, now many of the company documents are available on the website.
Right.
You have to do actually a little bit of research. I mean, the Google is a great advantage actually for people doing research. Yes, Google can get you documents of any kind.
Yes. Any kind, that's right.
You have to immerse yourself in Google, and you don't have to go to the library at all. I haven't gone to the library in the last 30 years. I don't need to. Because I get whatever I need, I get it on the web, I get it sent by people. When they write something, they send it to me, and I have everything, practically everything, more than I can read. So I think, we are living in a different world. I remember when I started writing some 30 years ago, 35 years ago, at that time, we had to go to the library, or I think that was about 1975. Every time we had to go to the library in order to find something. But now, no longer.
Yes, Prof. The other question is from Surya Kelana Putra, a PhD candidate student. So he asked about the final analysis on genre analysis combined with lexicogrammar is reasonably accepted. So
Yes.
I am interested in doing so. May I get more detailed analysis, Prof? Where can I get the article? Thank you.
Okay, yes, that is perfectly acceptable. In fact, I can actually list you. There are at least about a few hundred PhDs that people have done all over the world on conventional genre analysis, lexicogrammar and rhetorical moves and everything. PhDs. In fact, there was a time when English for Specific Purposes Journal, we had an editorial meeting, and people there, we are getting fed up of this kind of move analysis or conventional analysis, because this is a replication of the same story in different contexts, in different kinds of data. But I think it is still acceptable, but I think it will not probably be considered a first-rate work unless you go beyond it, go further, because there are so many people who have already done that. If you want to replicate that or add to the bulk of the work that people have done, perfectly fine. They will not actually throw it out, but at the same time, they will not pay much attention to it. It'll still be published. It'll still be published, but depends on what kind of data you have. So you have to bring in new data, which gives you new insight, even if it is lexicogrammar and rhetorical moves.
Right.
So that's where you actually have to be careful.
That does make sense, Prof. I agree.
Thank you.
Yes, Professor Tengku Silvana, I think that the questions from chat box have been